Sounds recording to the cloud. Hello, everyone. Paul Tomascak here. I'm joined by Carol Willard, who is the
Associate Dean for the School of Education.
not interim associate dean, but associate dean in the School of Education. Making sure everyone knew that. So I wanted to talk about the impact of ChatGPT on the things that we do in academics. I have no presentation. I have no answers. I've really got very little in general and in specific. I know from my experience this past semester that it's a thing. I taught a undergraduate combined course and had at least one student use ChatGPT in generating at least a first part of their research paper for the class, potentially the final draft as well, but I was unable to verify that. Casey Raymond and I, who team taught this course, we explicitly talked about ChatGPT to students in the class. So I think in terms of best practices, we did what we were supposed to do, or at least what was prudent to do, to say, we recognize that this is out there. We recognize that this is something that can be helpful when you're doing certain parts of research, but there should be no mistaking that this is not something that you can use to generate prose for your text. And we, at the time, said, we'll be able to detect this. You may think that we can't, but we can. And sure enough, I could, because the student who used it in a somewhat clumsy fashion and outed himself. But I'm under no illusions that that is the way that it will normally be. My expectation fully is that students will be using this in ways that will be effectively undetectable. Liz Schmidt gave a presentation, a workshop earlier in spring breakout where she touched on this, and I think she effectively underscored the fact that you can't, sort of like with plagiarism detectors, you can't just put text into a ChatGPT detector, at least at this point, and expect that you're going to get something out that you can just say, okay, 90%, this is bad, I'm going to fail you, because there's a lot of false positive. And I think just in general, there's a lot of reason to believe that there's going to be false positive and there's going to be false negative. So hopefully no one is just signing themselves over to the, I'm going to use the detector model, because that's not going to do it. I don't know what will do it unless we as instructors change the way that we do what we do. And I don't think that this is the end of the world. I've met plenty of people who believe that this is at least the foreshadowing of the end of the world. And I don't think that it is. I think in certain areas, it's going to be a lot harder to deal with. It's going to be a lot more frustrating for sure. But I don't think that this is something that, I think that this is something that should push us to be better as instructors and to think about what we're actually doing in teaching and what we're doing in the assignments that we give students. And okay, if there's this thing that you can use whatever you want to come up with an answer because I don't really care about it, then let's just say I don't care about it and move on. But for the things that we do care about, I think that we just need to understand that there are other ways around assessment. There's other ways of figuring out whether students are learning stuff. Fortunately, most of those require a lot more work, and no one wants to do more work. So that's I think where the problem really hinges, because there is no just do this and you'll be okay solution. So that's it. You can all go home now.
Beyond just more work, though, it's really about scale, right? Wait,
Hold on, Liz. John
Okay.
to the rescue.
that's such a rare occurrence, wait, Liz, let's see.
Schmidt burn.
Everything is set up as it should be. Could someone else try talking?
Hello. Can you hear me?
Kristen can't be heard either.
Yeah. We can see it.
And it is set to go to the restaurant. Let me just toggle it.
I heard you, Liz.
Oh,
Oh,
now.
Oh, okay.
For no apparent reason.
well, but let's go to the restaurant, which is where it should be connected to the speakers. Now,
Liz, can you say something now?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, okay. Thank you.
All
Good
right.
job, John.
it's set right where it was. Okay,
So Liz, take it away.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it's not just more work. I think the bigger problem is scale, because actually in the classes I teach of 30 to 40, I don't know that shifting the kind of assessments that I do, I don't think they will be more work. I think it'll be, there's initially some interest in, some work with design or things like that. But I think the real issue is scaling it. John and I talked about this. I had a distribution for principles of macroeconomics that I'm not sure I really believe. And, on the side. So on the other hand, when you're reading all of those disqualification appeals, they're really probably not my fault. So not my fault. But on the other hand, I'm like, I don't know. So I think it's hard for the large lecture about what you think you're going to do about it. Because, in intermediate macro theory, one of the easiest ways around it is to really tailor prompts that require them to use a model on a very recent economic event, which is super easy because macro is happening literally every single day. And then right now, current AI is just not up to date enough to understand, what's going on. And so for example, in that class, pivoting assignments, and really kind of putting the rubric heavily on addressing the prompt itself is one way that you kind of deal with that as well. But, John and I had pivoted to online exams in COVID, and I kind of kept them because I could have more exams with lower stakes, which is, a really good practice in inclusive teaching. But at the same time, we're both talking about, we're probably going to have to go back to some in-class work because I just can't, I'm not assessing what I think I'm assessing.
Lynn, you had a question?
Yeah, I was gonna, I agree with Liz about the scale of this. Having taught this past semester a large lecture class where I made them do a paper. One thing I do think helps is having a prompt that you discuss in class and only in class, and say on the prompt that's written, use the questions and use the prompt and use the information we discussed in class. So if you were not in class or not part of that discussion, you're not going to have that information. And also I'm very careful about giving precise sources. Sometimes they're not online. So I make PDFs of things for students to say, this is the source you have to use somewhere in your paper. So I hope those individualized kinds of things that require in-class work or in-class discussion will help with these things, but that's a best practice anyway, which is what I was already doing. I did have one student in a small class this spring who used AI in, believe it or not, a one-page response paper. I thought, why are you bothering, right? Why are you wasting your time and my time when you're on a one-page response? But they panicked, right? So I think at least in my classes, I see people using it because they're panicking. They don't have time, they're nervous, they're anxious. I don't know if other people are seeing that as well, though.
And it's the same reason that students cheat on things by and large. And it's not because they are inherently bad people. It's because they ran out of time. They managed time poorly and they don't want to get a 0 on it. So what's my choice? Well, I'll just do this. It's only a 1% part of the evaluation in the course. Yeah, I think that there's an awful lot of that is going on. That ends up being very hard to detect, being not worth your time to try to detect. The whole thing is really problematical.
But I also think a big motivation too is when, for those of us, teaching courses that are sometimes a service to the rest of the university, students will outsource work because when they don't value the process of doing the work. So students are willing to sort of outsource and minimize their time commitment to certain courses where they'll go full out in other courses that they essentially value. I mean, and that's why you hear something about designing authentic assessments and all of that, because they're arguing if people argue if you have the value of the experience, right? If you're doing some graphic design work for a portfolio, that's going to be part of the professional portfolio that you might use for either graduate work or in your interviews for a creative job, right? There's this built-in intrinsic motivation about the quality of your work and the process and what you've learned. Than if you're trying to answer some questions in economics that's a cognate for another major that you have. So I think it's also, students increasingly see college as a credential and not necessarily the acquisition of skills that is going to motivate that kind of behavior, as well as, the different courses that you are taking and whether someone sees it as this core important course versus not.
I think the cost of that, Liz, is we're going to have to spend a lot more time, at least in writing intensive courses that like my department teaches, we're going to have to spend a lot of time on the ethical use of this.
Right, because I guess I would say, I wouldn't, in intermediate macro in the fall, I'm already planning to say, okay, let's brainstorm. Are you interested in this topic? Let's brainstorm, what are 5 theses that you could, come up with around this topic? I'm interested, and then, you're going to take those and then you're going to have a follow-up assignment where you discuss them or discuss them with students or you get peer feedback. So there's things where I can say, use ChatGPT to generate ideas, because I think there's this tool of the students that sit up on front of a blank stream and they're right, they freeze, they don't know what to write, or they think they know that a professor is sort of evaluating, i.e. to them judging their writing, and they get very nervous because they don't think that their writing might be too simple or not sophisticated enough, right? Or not fancy enough. And I think ChatGPT kind of starting that is potentially a very good tool in helping them organize thoughts and things like that, and building them in the process as well. It did in terms of my syllabus, what I really changed in language for the spring is I didn't really mention ChatGPT by name, but I talked about basically it's cheating when you outsource the work of the course, when you're actually doing things that were, supposed to demonstrate your understanding, but you outsource it to someone else to demonstrate. And of course, that's Chegg. When you ask someone else to answer a question for you and you're essentially paying $19.95 a month to do it, you're outsourcing, right? Demonstration of the learning outcomes. And if an AI is generating an answer to a question, you've outsourced it, and inappropriate collaboration is outsourcing it. So basically, when you're doing work that isn't your own or not explicitly acknowledged as building on the knowledge of someone else, i.e. citation of another source and things like that. So I've tried to kind of say this is the general idea of why this is academic dishonesty, because you've outsourced it and you're pretending you have an understanding that you don't. And here's examples of how you do that. And these are kind of penalties that would go, but yeah.
I think that's a particularly important point, because there are people saying, well, now I've got to change my policy and we've got to change this policy. I don't think that this changes anything. I think it falls under the established guidelines that we have for dealing with academic integrity. So, okay, maybe you want to spell it out differently in your syllabus, but I think that the syllabi that we've had previously, if they are doing the job that they're supposed to, they encumber that sort of unethical behavior.
But I think I don't think it's just a simple, we keep what we have and then just include ChatGPT, because I think ChatGPT is going to be in their workplaces. It's going to be, they're going to have to know, they're going to have to engage ChatGPT here in order to move forward, I think, into whatever their futures are, because they're gonna have to work with it.
Yeah.
And I think they're gonna begin to see it more as a tool and less, like, the difference, Liz, between outsourcing and collaborating with the machinery is a gray area right now. You know, I think it's gonna be a gray area for us for a long time to come, but I mean, I don't think we all have to learn everything all at once for this fall, but but I do think this is not going to go away. I mean, it's a radical shift for writing and teaching writing and the learning outcomes and what constitutes using Chat GPT to get across those same learning outcomes. Because I think we're going to have to engage. We're going to have to engage it.
So more about being like a critical user of it?
Yeah,
Is that what you're thinking?
that's right.
Yeah.
So that they get the skill set of using it and questioning it at the same time.
Exactly, and questioning the resources or the
Yeah.
citations,
Yeah.
if they're really accurate, and going back to the resource and finding that that resource really did, or that citation really did say what the AI generated it said.
Yeah,
So-
or if it did exist in the first place,
Yeah.
because
Yes,
don't forget
right.
that especially ones like ChatGPT that don't search, hallucinate citations.
And that was how I found the
Yeah.
incidents
Yeah,
in
yeah.
my class. It created a bunch of seemingly reasonable,
Yeah, they're very
References.
plausible.
But it's doing that less and less. That with 4.0 was much more accurate than it was earlier. I mean, not with everything.
And it's just gonna get better and better, that's all it's good.
Can I jump in with something?
Go ahead, Rich.
As we're all here to struggle against the technology, just to, again, beyond just the idea of ChatGPT and all these AIs, there are now search engines that just search for help in the AI world. And just to really upset you, there's something called, there's an AI for that. That is the name of the search engine. And it lists 4,000 AIs. So this is exploding on the scene like wildfire in California and for everything. And I'm looking at Kelly going, it's for art, it's for drawing. This is not just, I mean, we're talking about these reports and I appreciate all those challenges as a single source, but it's going to be every one of us is going to have an AI generator for our specific area that you're going to be battling, which is pretty obnoxious. But
I have faculty who like a screenwriter, that one of the reasons the screenwriting guild is on strike is because of the uses of AI and the creation of screenplays. I mean, you know what I really would like to know is how we transition our faculty to stop just saying this is bad and we can't look at it any further than this is bad. You know, my faculty are really angry. And so maybe part of it's just talking, you know, I know, but you know, Emily was just telling me before the thing started that the last radical shift in English was when people learned to write.
I don't know if that was the last one.
Well, okay, books were probably a big deal too, but you know, what she was saying about that though was that at the time, even people were going to not be able to think for themselves anymore. You know, how do you think when you've written it down? You're going to forget it. It's not going to be there. You're not going to be using your mind. So again, I think we have to figure out a way to work with the tool, you know, and consider it a tool as opposed to an existential threat. Liz, what do you think? I mean,
Yeah, I don't think it's the existential threat. I mean, I've heard too many existential threats to actually believe. So when the existential threat that finally it does get us, I'm not going to see it coming because I've learned to tune out all of the existential threats, which is probably better, I think, for my mental health. So yeah, I mean, it's not. Google came out and there was this whole idea of why are we teaching knowledge foundations if you can just Google it? And that displays a real ignorance of the hierarchy of knowledge, right? And the hierarchy of what you're able to do in performance, because you can't do calculus if you don't understand algebra, right? And so you can't just Google algebra, so really it's about, kind of higher ordered. And so I think it's about students understanding that rewarding careers and a future and really the kind of standard of living that they want as professionals in society is going to require the fact that they're the master over AI, that AI becomes this tool, but in the end, they're framing the problems and they're solving problems, and they're the ones that have to coach AI as well. So I don't know. We're not in Skynet territory yet. But.
Kristen pointed out that we didn't identify who was in the room because I've been assuming that by looking at a whiteboard, you can actually see who's sitting in the room, but other than Carol and I, Lee Wilson was mentioned. Let's see, how close did Kristen come? She
No,
got
Jessica
Lee Wilson.
Harris.
No, Jessica Harris. We've got Emily Mitchell from Penfield Library, and we've got the heretofore silent Stephanie Pritchard from the English Creative.
Nice, thanks. So one thing I appreciate is about all of this conversation is that the question of authorship and integrity is something that is much more complex and nuanced than sometimes our students know. And I like the way that Liz is approaching it because it's about authorship and the nuance of authorship. And that in some settings, it's totally normal that you use these words that came from this other thing. And in other settings, that's definitely not okay. And it can differ from setting to setting and being more explicit about that. One of my favorite Paul stories from the last year is the parents that tried to defend their child's use of AI because it's used in business settings. Now, clearly, this was like a post hoc defense. It didn't have any feet under it, but a conversation about how different settings and different authorship require different standards is a normal conversation that we have been having for decades in academia. And this is a brand new twist on it.
Anta, you have your hand up.
I know Kelly wanted to say something before, after Rich. Kelly, do you want to go?
It was just building off a lead, but I think somebody else went in that direction too, just about, how are we going to catch up if the students are running rapid with this? We're going to have to understand it too and the parameters.
So since I gave a presentation on ChatGPT, I'm actually part of several groups on AI, ChatGPT, on Facebook, as well as on Twitter. And all of these groups, the main discussion that's going on is that, as Rich said, there's plenty, it's exploding, it's going to stay. Something that we need to understand is we need to create assignments that actually develop critical AI skills now, because that would be a competency that would be required by every department in some varying degree very soon. And what is that critical AI skill is basically you create an assignment, you tell them, you write it first, put it on AI, see what AI gives you. Is there a difference? What are those differences? How are these AI resources helpful? How are these AI resources not helpful? Is there anything you can do to give a better prompt to AI so that your assignment or the response of that AI can actually improve? And I think that is something we need to teach our students, and especially what Liz also talked about, how we need to have a syllabus statement about it. So I guess we are not outsourcing the whole writing, but definitely we can outsource, and our students will be helped if they outsource some of the pieces of the writing. For example, students with disabilities, especially with ADHD or ADD, they have difficulty starting a topic. And if AI can help them give an outline for a certain topic, they will have a better start. People who have English as their second language, it can help them tremendously in writing, changing the tone, changing the structure. And I understand that simply because I had been on that side of the fence as well myself. So I guess we need to understand how AI can be actually advantageous to us, and we need to cash in all those advantages of AI. Like there are so many games that we do not play in our classes that can be created on AI. And the last thing that I want to say is we can even make our thinking visible through AI, because a lot of us do not do poetry in our classes. We do not do painting in our classes. We do not, we do not play games or board games in our classes with our concepts. And probably those are some of the things that AI can create for us without us getting too involved in the creation. And it is taking care of some of the cumbersome work that we don't have time for. So that was my thing on AI.
I do think it's true that AI is being used more and more in the field, certainly in the world of education, in the special education, report writing, recording testing data, writing narratives about students based on testing data, report card comments. A lot of that stuff is generated through AI, or at least a template is used for that. And so I think, it's, as we're preparing educators, we should help them to think about, well, what more information do you want to add to that, right? Here's sort of the framework. What do you want to add to that? What would help you understand the student we're talking about more? So I do agree that we need to, I don't know if embrace is the word, but recognize it and use it as a tool that we're helping our students develop as professionals. And I think that there's ways to combine things, like looking at a couple of different resources and seeing the trend in the through line and applying to that class discussion that can help you to, can help our students maybe use chat and some kind of AI as a tool to help them get started. Certain students with disabilities can benefit from AI and help them be full participants in the class, and they can use those tools. So it's another way of kind of thinking about artificial intelligence as being a support, just like calculators are a support for students who have trouble with math facts, for example.
Right, and there are some cool ones. I've played a little bit, well, I have issues with it as well, but I've played a little bit with Chat PDF, where you upload a PDF to it and then you can ask questions about the PDF to the AI and just have a conversation about this article or whatever, which in theory could be fantastic. In practice, the one that I played with it on, its understanding was maybe not the best, but it's definitely better than nothing if you're very confused. And then add to that my issues as a librarian going, ooh, I don't think our vendor contracts allow us to upload stuff that we subscribe to this. I'm just going to pretend that I didn't see anything here. But like, I can see how that would be super useful to someone.
Yeah.
And I don't see how you could argue that it's evil, except possibly it's the legal thing with contracts.
Sure, just even helping students to understand how to read an article, right? So when you have a set of questions that you're going to ask, the idea might be that those questions then become part of that student's thinking whenever they read an article, and it's a transactional model.
It's like reading it with a friend and being able to talk over it. A very uncritical friend that you might be able to ask your questions.
But do you think you could take an article about teaching and generative AI and create a discussion for faculty? I'm trying to think of a way to get my faculty feet wet in this,
I think you could absolutely upload one to it and have faculty ask it questions about it.
Yeah, that's what I
an
mean.
interesting exercise.
Yeah, okay.
It was not perfect at the time that I tried it. I uploaded one of my own articles because it's licensed Creative Commons, so I knew I was able to. And it did not pick up on all of the things, but it got the broad ideas and it got some of the specific examples, and it's probably developed since.
I wonder, all of these suggestions are really good, and I'm wondering if there's a way to incorporate these kinds of ways of using AI or Chat GPT into the very assignment. So instead of if you're going to use it to help you with developing a thesis, or if you're going to use it to have a conversation, if you're going to use it to get some ideas about what an article says or a book says, maybe that can be part of the assignment to say, okay, you need to do a reflection on how you used it as an addendum or something to the assignment you're actually doing, so that there's some accountability, and you're being transparent about what you're doing. Because that's the nature in any kind of scholarship. We want to be transparent in how we're doing our work, and that might actually help them to be more transparent.
So you were right, Lynn. I mean, APA came up with citation for ChatGPT. Another thing that I am also thinking about is at least do 1 or 2 assignments in every class of mine, which is related to AI, so that students can actually use AI. The third thing is, which is very, very interesting, which I saw when I was researching for my ChatGPT presentation last week. I noticed that there are already journal articles that have been published where ChatGPT is actually a co-author. And so the authors did not know how to actually give co-authorship to ChatGPT. And therefore they wrote a disclaimer at the end. And this is like, May 2023 that it was published. Disclaimer at the end, I wish we can give a full authorship to ChatGPT, but this article was pretty much like 50% or 60% written by ChatGPT. So people are using it. It's not that not only students are using it, lawyers are using it. I'm sure you have seen the news where a lawyer actually gave some kind of an argument based on ChatGPT, which was wrong and incorrect, absolutely. But people are using it. And people who are minority, they are using it. Minority teachers are using it. Minority students are using it more. So it's a question also of diversity, equity, and inclusivity here.
On the diversity angle, one of the concerns has been that since the volume of information out there for ChatGPT to pick from has been so overrepresented by one part of the population, that we end up converging more toward something that is not diverse. We continue to get answers that are going to be, despite our efforts to be more diverse in things, that by nature of AI, it's funneling things toward less diverse sorts of answers, or answers that potentially have embedded biases in them. I'm not sure how until the makers of the AI decide that they're going to do something proactively on the software end of it, I don't know how you solve that. So if you're talking about things in isotope geochemistry, it really doesn't matter. But if you're talking about things related to culture, society, anything, then you're potentially continuing to hold the needle in the direction of the
If anyone's interested in that, I know there's a book on the new bookshelf about diversity in AI, which I ordered this spring. And it looked kind of interesting.
Nice plug. Nice plug.
Thank you.
It's nice having a library.
That's why I came.
what else is there to talk about?
The use of AI came up in some of the work that some of my colleagues got from students, and the idea of intellectual integrity and the importance of, even if it's a minimum sort of consequence for the student, but filling out that intellectual integrity, the maximum report on that, so that we can see if the student is using AI in a way that's inappropriate or continuously and hoping that student understand the appropriate use of that AI, that tool, and just sort of using Maxine as a way to document, not necessarily those penalized, but to document so that there's a sort of a database or a common understanding. If it's the same student who is having these recurring infractions and then each time they say to the instructor, oh, I really didn't know I should use it or whatever that might be. So I think that that's a really important point for us as instructors to keep thinking about how we can, I'm gonna say continue to support students in academic integrity issues and understanding what artificial intelligence has to do with academic integrity.
I think that is, although you're smirking a bit on it, I think that it's true that this is a means of trying to support students. So, okay, you can eliminate the bad apples and not bother with them, but for the students who aren't intrinsically bad, but they just don't know where the line is and they don't feel that we're helping them to figure out where the line is. I think that we need to call them on it. We need to have the conversation. And then it's on them to decide, okay, we've had this conversation, now I've recalibrated and I'm going to do things this way. Or do they just continue to, well, this is the easy way to do this, so I'm going to keep using it and I'm probably not going to get caught. Oh, if you get caught again, well, maybe then your associate dean has a talk with you and it's not just something that's going on in the classroom. So as with anything, our associate deans are really eager for you to, when you see something, say something. So when a student uses something that is inappropriate, whether it's cheating, whether it's plagiarism, whether it's using artificial intelligence in a way that you've not sanctioned in class, fill out the report. It doesn't have to be an academic penalty situation. And if it's not an academic penalty, it's more likely that the student isn't going to make a stink about it. So as well, it's less work on your part. It's just fill out the form. And if the student never does anything again in their 4 years or however many years here, that's great. But if they do, we're at least in a position where we can have a different sort of conversation with them to support them to try to come to getting them to understanding where we want them to be with this technology.
That's one reason I think I have been stung into action this summer. No, really, I feel like, all right, my department touches almost every freshman in the composition classes. And it seems to me that if we, right from the giddy up, make generative AI a subject matter and one that we don't make them afraid to discuss, but to actively engage and think about and use and disagree with and work with and override and all of the ways that they can just be active doing that. That might be a mimicking. See, what I'm trying to figure out is what the new way writing process is going to get its learning outcome. And obviously, as Liz says, it can't be by outsourcing. So how do we insource this? And how do we keep ChatGPT as something our kids can become skilled at and still reference with, a grain of constant salt? Anyway. But it seems like capturing them really early on is not a bad idea.
In English 102 talked about things like ChatGPT for the writing portion. It would be easy for the librarians to tie in the pros and cons of some of the AI search tools right now, which some of them do some cool things, but none of them search anything other than open content currently, which there's a lot there, but like, library subscribes to stuff for a reason, I hope. I hope other kids still value that. Please.
Do.
And kind of as just a quick question that connects to what Lee was saying, I'd like to know, so obviously if a student has ChatGPT like generate a whole thing, then that's, you know, like an academic integrity violation. And one of the things that we're thinking about are all these other ways and all these other uses, right? But are there any other, I would say, like, hard and fast academic integrity violations connected to ChatGPT aside from generating the whole thing, right? Like what's the, like, obviously there's a big gray area and the gray area is going to move a whole bunch, but because we have like several people from the dean's office here, I'd be curious to know, like, aside from this, you know, AI wrote my paper, are there others? Are there other like huge violations that we should just say right from the back, like the get-go, let's tell our students, like, don't do this too.
Certainly the big one is just the putting the prompt in and saying, write me 1,000 words on what? Copy and paste, and that's done. I'm not sure if it's just a section of a paper, how you're finding that. So you can, you know, if you have the discussion with the student and they say, no, this is all mine, and you've got no objective way of saying that this one section, you know, which seems incredibly polished compared to all the crappy stuff in the other sections, that's one that we grapple with prior to this being a thing. We grappled with the same thing. Anyone reading a student paper is going to go along and find the thing that doesn't fit. And if there's no way of finding where that comes from, then I've had the unfortunate conversation with a lot of instructors that you can't penalize the student unless you can really demonstrate it or that they admit that they've done that. And if you can't find, you know, here's where you copied and pasted this from, then, you know, it's the ice is too thin to do anything. But it's then that you can move on to, well, I really don't think this is your work. You're going to need to do this in addition to demonstrate it. And okay, if the student understands the concept, if they've done the work, they can do the other, they can jump over the other hurdle and say, see, I understand this concept, and everyone feels good. But it's when they're offended at that, the implication that you should make me do this, and they don't do it, that, well, I gave you the chance to demonstrate that you were on the level, but you chose not to. So that's really important.
I think Frank has had his hand up.
Frank.
Thanks. I was curious to see how long ago. So I appreciate the conversation. I don't really have a lot to say about the most recent part about academic integrity. I guess personally speaking, I'm ambivalent about ChatGPT, but I think I really agree with everyone who's saying it's here. We have to engage with it. You know, whether you want to have assignments specifically incorporated or not, you know, I'm sure there's a spectrum. I guess to Lee's point, you know, my faculty, no one's really lost their mind about it. Some people are more concerned about it than others. I would say to those people who think this is going to, you know, this is a game changer, this is an existential threat. And that is, I think of the issues that affect our students, this is maybe not even the top 3. I mean, I think their mental health is fallen. I think their skill sets are not what they used to be. Those are the things that I worry more about than, you know, whether they're going to cheat on an out of class writing assignment, you know, because they've been cheating off and on for years, and most won't do it anyways. But I guess that's what I would say to people who are desperately worried about it.
On a more positive note, the School of Business has a course in which students will be working with ChatGPT. It was one of the ones that were funded under the SIG grant program.
You can't just stop there. Now I'm all intrigued. Can you say like 2 more sentences?
Well, it's going, Mohammed Tajrapour is going to be running a class where students will be looking at how ChatGPT and similar tools can be used in their careers in business. So including issues such as the ethical use of AI.
Thank you.
So if when you're talking amongst your colleagues in your departments, if this comes up, just make sure that you're having the conversations there, that you're expressing that we would like this to be something that we're working with rather than working against. And that if students are using it inappropriately, you need to have the conversation with them. You need to make sure that that is in the system.
One study that just came out a week or so ago was done by at MIT by a couple of economic grad students. And one of the things they found is that the use of ChatGPT raised the productivity of workers with less experience and less expertise. But it had little effect at this stage of development on the productivity of higher wage workers. And one of the concerns that a lot of economists have is what this will do to our labor markets, because it's going to cause some pretty substantial shifts in terms of the return to college, in terms of a transformation, in terms of where labor demand is going to be going. On average, it should make everyone more productive and raise GDP per capita, but it's going to have some significant distributional effects that we can only guess at this stage.
Also makes it harder for us as experts to understand the appeal to students who are novices. Because I look at the research ones, for instance, and I'm like, this is terrible. Why would anyone use this? But then I remember, there was a time when I had no clue how any of this worked. And actually, I would have been all about this thing, despite all of the flaws that I can now see.
On a bright note, in the potential of AI, it's really similar AI technology. My father has a neuromuscular condition and it's degenerative. And since last year, he's basically losing the ability to talk and be understood well. And it's the AI that actually is synthesizing phrases he usually says. They actually have voice recordings of his voice. And so instead of having that robot thing like that Stephen Hawking talked, it actually sounds a lot more like him when he generates some phrases and conversations and things like that. Using an app on his phone. But it's part of that, the AI has basically he's been working with it while he can still talk. So it anticipates, it's picked up on things that he usually says, and synthesizing the pattern of his voice, it basically replicates how he would usually sound instead of being a new voice altogether. So.
And there has been some recent work that has been published on neural implants in creating speech from brain waves for people without the ability to speak. And so there's some interesting things that are going to be coming forward with AI.
Yeah, and actually, having celebrating my 15th anniversary as a survivor of cancer, I would have probably preferred a chatbot to some of the surgeons that I talked to in my course of being treated. Hey, I'm just saying that would have been an improvement.
And there are some new antibiotics that have been developed and going through testing now that were generated through AI. So there's a lot of really potential benefits from variations of AI.
Are we out of time, John?
Pretty much. But if you'd like to come back and discuss this more, there's another session on this coming up. Is it next week? Next week, I think. And it may be an entirely different conversation by then, depending on what's happening between now and then.